Welcome back to Financial Clarity for Doctors, everyone. This is Rachelle Vanderzanden here with Corey Janoff.
Hello.
We are coming off of a whirlwind first month of President Trump's second term in office. It has definitely been a whirlwind. There's been lots of headlines, lots of executive orders, lots of action. And we have had a lot of clients have questions about what should we do? What is this? How is this going to impact the stock market? Should we make any changes and things like that? And if you're following the headlines, it makes sense to feel like some pretty strong reactions to these policy proposals that seem very broad and they may have very large economic impacts and things like that. But I think it's important to take a second to reflect on how this affects you, how this affects your money, how it may not affect those things. So we're going to chat about it a little bit because I know it's on a lot of people's minds. We're going to just give you a quick overview, go through a couple of the policy proposals that he's had over the last few weeks and how those things in particular may affect things moving forward, but also just talk about student loans, talk about job stuff. All of this stuff may eventually affect us, but maybe not as much as you think. And I think it's important to put it all in perspective. And, we can be as concerned as we want to be about everything else that's going on in the world. But if you focus in on your money and make decisions about your money based on those personal implications, that is the best way to go about it. Any
Yeah.
other? Yeah, Corey says
Focus
that.
on you and things that impact you directly, what you can control. Self-admittedly, this first month of the Trump presidency, I've been not paying a ton of attention. I've been more focused on my Philadelphia Eagles in the Super Bowl, which is this week. If you can watch it on YouTube, I'm swagged out. So by the time you hear this, I'll either be very happy or my outfit's going to be burned. Um,
Oh,
but uh, but yeah, it's I think again, reiterating, focusing on what impacts you and what you can control. You can watch the news 24/7. 99% of it doesn't affect you one iota or it's completely out of your control. So we kind of
yeah.
have to, it's good to be informed, to pay good attention, but we also don't want to freak out about things that are completely out of our control. If policy changes occur, if things are implemented, we can see how they tend to matriculate um, and how they do impact our lives. And in a lot of cases, it's going to impact things. One, it might not impact you at all, but two, if it does, it might impact things differently than you initially suspected it might. So keep an open mind, be agile, ready to pivot if things do impact you in a way that you didn't anticipate. But we don't want to make any rash decisions with our finances because when it comes to financial planning, we want to look at things in a long-term perspective. And for most of you, when you look back 30, 40, 50 years from now, this is just going to be a blip on the radar. Oh, yeah, remember the Trump years? Oh, yeah, remember the Biden years? Like, oh yeah, that happened. Remember COVID? Yeah. So a lot of this stuff in hindsight won't be as grand or extreme as we may perceive it in the moment.
Especially with your money stuff. I
Exactly.
think, yeah. And so we've said this before and we'll say it again, but the long term outlook for the stock market, generally, historically speaking, is not really influenced by who's the president. The bigger economic fluctuations that we have, on a wider scale, are much more important than who is in office. So that's one thing to keep in mind. It's also really hard to tell ahead of time how specific policy decisions may or may not impact the stock market, even in the short term. We might expect it to have one impact on the stock market, and then the stock market may choose to interpret that situation entirely different, and it moves the opposite way of how we think it's going to move. And that's why it's really, really, really challenging to try to time the stock market. If we're going to be like, oh, we should definitely sell because all of this stuff is intense and we think the market's going to go down. No one's really good at that. Some people are. I shouldn't say no one. No one is not accurate, but very few people are good at that. And most of the time, when you try to do that, you do it incorrectly and you end up costing yourself more money. So we want to focus on those long-term goals, like what's retirement look like, and kind of stick to that and not make a lot of adjustments in the short term. That being said, people have questions, about what's happening and about how it may or may not impact the economy. So we want to talk a little bit about what does this mean for us? What should we do differently? So I think with the stock market specifically, over the last few weeks, we've seen some small movements that have been influenced by, executive orders and things like that, but nothing too big. Even in President Trump's first term and as a president, like he would say something on Twitter and we would see these big, like 3% swings in the stock market because the stock market was really reacting to, oh, what about these tariffs? What's going to happen? We're seeing smaller swings now, maybe because in his first term, it seemed like, okay, we're threatening tariffs. But then, when it actually comes, like when the pavement hits the whatever that saying is, like it's just not as
The
big of a
rubber
deal
hits
as
the
we thought
road.
it. That's the one. When the rubber hits the road, like it just hasn't been as like what we think it's going to be. It hasn't been what he's threatened. And so we have like these big kind of bluffs basically. And then in reality, like that's not what happens. So the stock market seems to kind of like have clued into that a little bit, like, okay, let's see how this actually plays out before we react too much. And we're going to go through like a few examples. Um,
Yeah, I think a good example. So my brother called me the night, it was a Sunday night before the proposed tariffs were supposed to be implemented on a Monday. And he's like, hey, Asian markets are freaking out. Should I be selling my stuff and then wait for it to crash and then buy the dip? I'm like, no, it's probably not going to be as big of a thing. If anything, just buy the dip, don't sell anything. And then that Monday, I think it was like, oh, actually, we're pausing the tariffs for a month
oh,
after we
yeah,
implemented them. And then, oh, it's not going to be as bad in China. And then it like the market went down and then came back up the next couple days, and it's basically where it
it's
was
fine.
at, you know.
It's totally fine. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
looking at over the last 5 days, the S&P 500 is basically even, and that is exactly the time frame for when all of this happened. So Thursday, Friday, President Trump is like, we're going to hit Canada, Mexico, and China with 25% tariffs. It's happening. I am not backing down. That's basically like the rhetoric on Thursday and Friday. He doesn't end up pausing them. There's like some back office talk about, oh, maybe he will pause them. Monday rolls around and he's like, "Oh, I just talked to like Justin Trudeau on the phone and we're going to pause those Canada tariffs and put them off for a month." So, okay, that's out the window. And then they also paused the tariffs with Mexico after speaking to the Mexican president, and now that 25% tariff isn't happening and now China's only 10%. And that's literally that all happened within like a 5 or 6 day period of time. And the stock market kind of went like and just ended up doing the same thing. Like it's just we ended up exactly where we were before. And there's been a little concern with the tariffs in China specifically because there's been some retaliatory measures, but we've seen that like impact Google specifically, and like a couple of companies, but not the market as a whole. So again, we're seeing these like kind of dramatic news headlines that aren't playing out in the stock market as much as we think. And so like we don't want to do anything drastic, like sell things and then try to get back in when the dip happens. Like let's just not mess around with that kind of stuff.
It's the art of the deal. This is how you negotiate publicly with other countries.
Yeah, moving on. So I think a couple of other policy things to talk about that may or may not have broader economic implications. So obviously coming straight into office, like bottom line, we want to have much stricter immigration policies, like across the board in every single different way. Like we don't want people coming here is basically the gist of it. Like that's the idea. And so there will be lots of social impacts with this, and that's not something to be minimized, but it's also not necessarily going to affect the stock market as much as you think. So it's unclear how what a longer term economic impact might look like. But immigration policy also changes from like, one Congress session to the next and one president to the next. So that's one of the big reasons it's harder to see what the long term implications will be because policy won't stay stagnant for the long term. Like that just won't happen. One concern that I have personally, and maybe we see in like the economy playing out, is that less immigration will mean fewer workers, which means maybe an even tighter job market. It's harder to find people to do the jobs that you need them to do, which may impact inflation. But again, like this is such a like long-term trickle down effect that we don't really know how that's going to play out because it is also not the only thing that plays into inflation. So we just don't know how that's going to play out. But and the stock market hasn't seemed to read too much into that at all, like the long-term implications of immigration policy changes. So we'll see. But again, nothing to like really do anything about in the short term when it comes to your money.
Yeah. And again, for most of you, it may not impact you in your job directly. Um, if there are any immigration policies that could impact you and your local economy or hospital or employer, then yeah, let's take it into consideration whether it impacts cash flow, revenues, cost, whatever. But for now, I think it's just a sit tight, wait and see operation. One that
Yeah.
potentially could impact you that's been a discussion topic since probably we've started our careers is student loans and public service loan forgiveness. What do we want to do here? Lots of
I mean,
confusion.
you could, yeah, what were you saying?
So lots of confusion. No one knows anything right now is the short answer.
No, no, absolutely no one knows anything. Yeah. So I think we can look at past policy like proposals from President Trump. So when he was president the first time around, every year in his budget, he proposed eliminating PSLF. He was like, I don't like this program. Let's get rid of it. But even in his proposals, it was only for new borrowers. So people that were currently taking out student loans, which means anyone that was already participating in that program would have been grandfathered in. And in each of those like budget proposals, they like send the budget to Congress, it gets all chopped up and blah 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 blah, and then they like argue about it back and forth between the two chambers in Congress, and then it goes back to the president for approval, and maybe he argues back, and it's like this whole drawn out process. But the budget, like that was always removed. Like that was always a thing that Congress, for whatever reason, decided we don't want to eliminate this program. We would like to keep it around. So it never happened. I think he will probably propose to end that program again. I don't know if it will happen, but I think it's really unlikely that he would pull it again, that anyone would propose pulling it out from people that are currently participating, because it would be very unpopular, to say the least.
Bingo.
So
You just look at if
yeah.
you're a congressman or woman or a senator and you're voting on keeping or eliminating student loan forgiveness, there's millions and millions and millions of people all over the country, red and blue states, no matter who you are, lots of people have student loans and are pursuing loan forgiveness. And if your representative is proposing ending that for you, do you think you're going to vote to get that person reelected when they're up for reelection? Probably not. So it's a bit of a conflict of interest for them. They want to get reelected. What is it? Every 2 years for representatives, every 6 years for senators, I believe. Um, so if, it's kind of in their self-interest not to end it for current people, maybe phase it out for new borrowers. So yeah, for your teenager that might want to go to med school, they may not have public service loan forgiveness available to them, but it doesn't
Mhm.
impact them directly at the moment. But yeah, I would be very shocked if they just pulled the rug out from everyone. It's probably more of a phase out thing where, loans taken out after the year 2030 are no longer eligible for public
Yeah.
service loan forgiveness.
Yeah. That being said, I think all of the confusion around payment plans and things like that will probably get worse before it gets better. I think that if you are in forbearance because you were on the save plan, that plan is probably dead. Like there is probably no save plan moving forward. The Biden administration was kind of fighting to save pieces of it. I mean, 95% sure the Trump administration is not going to fight to keep any part of that payment plan. But that does mean that everyone, like, they have to figure out what payment plan to put people in, how to calculate the payment, and things like that. So I think that people have said that they've received emails estimating like it's late 2025 when their payment will be recalculated and they will be put on another payment plan if they don't do anything proactively. So important things to note there is that while you are on the save forbearance, you are not making qualifying payments towards PSLF. So if that is your goal, it's not happening right now. Other thing is that you're not paying interest. So for people who are planning to pay off their loans eventually, this is not all that bad. It's like, okay, I mean, you're not getting charged interest on whatever the bulk of your student loans is. So You can potentially apply to move into a new payment plan so that you can start making payments sooner and start having those qualifying payments count. But when you do that, you will have to do the income recertification, which means they're going to look at your new income. If it's higher, your payment's going to go up. So that's something to probably just think about carefully, like whatever your situation is. Am I willing to stay on this forbearance knowing I might have to wait longer for PSLF? Do I want to go ahead and like recertify my payment sooner, even if my payment's going to be a lot higher? And you can think about all that stuff. And there's no right answer because we don't know exactly what the future of these payment plans is going to look like. The other thing to consider is that right now there is a way to buy back the payments that you did not make while you were on forbearance. But you can't do that until you've reached that 120 payment count if you're counting those months on forbearance. And that buyback procedure is not part of the PSLF law. It's just an administrative policy that was put in place by the Department of Education. Because it's just a policy like that, they can change it again. So that buyback may not be around when you reach that 120 payments. So don't count on it. Like think of it as a like, hopefully this is around when I get there. And if so, I should absolutely take advantage of it. But it might not be there.
Can the Department of Education change it if there is no Department of Education? Are they trying to gut the Department of Education?
I think I just snorted a little bit.
But no,
I
jokes
like
aside, I think yeah, it's a lot of it's in flux. A lot of it could change. I think everyone's circumstances are unique, so don't take this as specific advice or guidance. But generally speaking, like if you're within about a year of achieving the 120 payment count and you're on the save plan and forbearance currently, it might be worth waiting and seeing. And then once you hit 120 months, doing that buyback. And then you just pay a lump sum from all your missed payments over the last year. And then you're forgiven. If you're a ways out from forgiveness, this current forbearance period doesn't count as payments toward PSLF. So it could be worth switching to one of the other payment plans just so you can keep the train rolling on your trajectory towards forgiveness, especially if you're still in training, because then, your payment would be based on your income at a low income level, and you can start getting more payments counting at that lower income level again.
yeah. Yeah, I think the biggest things to consider are how close are you? How much will your payment go up? Is it going to go from like $200 a month to $3,000 a month? Like that's a big difference. And then also just like how certain is your career path? If you're pretty confident you're going to be at a not for profit for like years and years and years and years, like okay, we're probably fine. If you're a person who's like the second I get 120 payments, I want to switch jobs. I want to like go part time and I wouldn't be qualifying anymore. And you're basically delaying all of these things that you want to do in your career until your loans are forgiven. That is another great reason to like get onto a qualifying payment plan sooner than later. Oh, student loans. It's always a big topic, no matter what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do we want to
Um,
touch on tariffs more, or do we feel like we hit that one
no,
all
I think
right?
we covered tariffs pretty
Yeah.
well. I mean, there was a moment when they signed an executive order that was basically like, we are pausing all payments on federal grants and loans. And it was like, what does that even mean? Right. Like, so, and then, like it's this headline reaction where everyone kind of freaked. I had emails that day about clients being like, what should we do? And I was like, I don't think we should do anything right now. I get that this could have bigger implications. And then by the end of the day, a judge was like, ooh, let's hit pause on this. I don't know if this is legal. And then the next day, President Trump was like, just kidding. Like so if we make adjustments to these things that are happening and then it turns around and they're just like not even happening, like we just don't want to be playing that game. So just one more example of how that works.
I think the
Um,
grant thing is an example, though, of an area that could impact some of you that are doing research. If there is a
right,
reduction in grant funding,
right. So this,
obviously don't
yeah,
do anything until like it's official. But maybe if there's more chatter about grant money being reduced, um, it could be worth maybe thinking of some alternative plans for career pursuits.
yep. I think like grant cycles are pretty long. So I don't know that it will have any impact on people directly in the next like year or so, unless again, he's like, we're just not paying these things that we already said we were going to pay. Like that would be a problem. But realistically, I think that the more likely thing is that they will just reduce funding to places like the NIH and stuff like that. And so when you're doing these new grant submittals and things like that, it may just mean you're less likely to actually be awarded that grant because there is less grant money.
It's
So
more
that could
competitive.
absolutely, yeah, yeah. Or yeah, I mean, depending on what it is, maybe it's just like that grant's done. They're not doing that anymore
Yeah.
for the
But then
next
keep in
5
mind,
years.
in 4 years, someone new will be in
I
office. It'll
know.
be a new
I
set of
know.
people. They might increase grant funding. So
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, every president has their own policy like goals and things like that. So it changes from person to person. I think the other thing is that like just talking about some general career impact things, if you're a federal employee, like that's probably a little bit scary right now. I know everyone at the VA basically got a letter that was like, you should quit. And if you quit, we'll pay you until like September and it's really better for you anyway. But that letter didn't mean that you had to quit. You know, it doesn't mean that the VA doesn't need doctors anymore. They do. Like, so I still don't think that that necessarily is going to be bad for career, but I get that that can make it uncomfortable in a job to feel like your employer doesn't want you there. Like that sucks. That's not a good feeling. But in reality, like, does it impact you financially? Like, probably not right now. But if you want to, like, if it makes you feel more confident to know what other job options are out there, it's probably a good time to just explore that. Like, we don't need to quit our job right now. I like my job. It's great. But just knowing what other options are out there is a good idea because we need doctors wherever they are.
was this a letter that was mailed or emailed? I'd be curious what the cost of mailing a letter to all federal employees
I
is.
thought it was emailed, but
That
I don't
makes
know.
more
That's a great
sense.
question.
How
Yeah.
many federal employees are times what? 51 cents a stamp?
Yeah.
Subsidized by
I
the post office.
No, I don't think that. Yeah, I don't think they have to pay postage.
Well,
But
they
yes, the
have to pay the
USPS
drivers, the
obvious.
gasoline,
Exactly,
the
exactly. So
envelope costs, the paper
so like
costs, the ink
yeah, so
costs.
if
Like
they
there's
mail them
costs.
all, yeah, so if they mail them all, the federal
Someone's got to
government just
stuff those
spent
envelopes.
so the federal government just spent a ton of money to send that all
Yeah.
out, despite the fact that they're talking about cost
Well,
cutting.
what
Like
I think
who
I saw something they like fired a whole department and then they had to hire someone back to like process the timesheets for the department for their final paychecks. So yeah, yeah, interesting times if you're a federal employee right now. Most of you guys listening as physicians probably not impacting your job
you
directly,
have a lot more job
but
security
your
than those people.
support staff might change. The resources behind the scenes might change. The administrative people might change. It might be a little more hectic if there's less bodies at the VA hospital working to help support you. Um, so yeah, indirectly, it absolutely could have some impacts on
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. The one other thing that I was kind of thinking about is that as part of like immigration changes, there has been a lot of talk about maybe making it harder to like get H-1B visas. So those like visas where the employer can demonstrate that they need to hire an immigrant and they cannot fill that position with like existing citizens in the US or whatever it is. So um I don't know. I think that there's been a lot of back and forth on that specific piece of immigration policy with there being voices on both sides within the immigration or within the administration. So that will be something to keep an eye on, and I think that it could impact medicine specifically because obviously we have a lot of immigrants that are doctors, so it can affect people who are immigrants applying for jobs. It could also potentially affect other people, just if we don't have enough people to fill these positions, like how is the workload, like what does that all look like at work? So again, I think we'll see how that goes. I do think that like the policy for that may vary by industry. Like who knows how they would actually implement, something like that or changes to that program. Oh man, it's so confusing. That's the truth. Ooh, I can't hear you, Corey. Are you on mute?
Yes, I was. That's why I try not to pay too much attention to some of these news topics because they often don't turn into anything and they confuse people more than they help people. That's where
Mm-hmm.
kind of going back to that illustration I shared a few episodes ago that you said I don't have licensing approval, but I think I do, is that Carl Richards Venn diagram. If you're watching on YouTube, things that matter, things that you can control. If it's, overlapping circles, focus on the things that matter that you can control, and everything else. It's hard not to stress and worry about it, but try not to because it's completely out of your control. Um, so focus on, again, things that matter that you can control. Try to, ignore the rest of it as best you can. Monitor the policy decisions that may impact you directly. So again, if you're a federal employee, maybe Medicare reimbursements, research grant funding, et cetera.
Medicaid reimbursements.
Medicaid,
Uh-huh.
um, but again, in 4 years, it's going to be someone new. We're going to be fretting about something else. I was listening to a Morgan Housel podcast episode recently where he was talking about we've actually gotten to a pretty good point in society when Congress is bickering over arguably some silly things. Now, some of this stuff isn't silly, but as a society, humans, we like to complain. Like no matter what, if we're in a utopia where everything's perfect, we're going to complain about whose grass is greener. Um, if you live in a neighborhood with an HOA, you get some of those silly emails and notices like, "Hey, your lawn has brown spots in the summer. You need to take better care of it." And it's just like, really, come on. um, but yeah, it's all things considered, we've got it pretty good right now. Economy's humming along. Stock market's at an all-time high. Um, yeah, things are changing, but they always are. There's never been a period in time where things haven't changed, and it's scary in the moment. Change, we don't know what to expect. It's the unknown, but we'll get through it, and
Yep.
it'll be something new that we are focused on 1, 2, 3, 5, 10, 20 years from now.
Yep. And I think like if you're one of those many, many people who feels kind of anxious about what's going on in the world right now, like there's lots to be worried about. And maybe you can kind of mark this one off the list. Like you don't really need to be that worried about money stuff, or most people don't, because like for our audience mostly, like you have better job security than almost anyone out there, like as a physician. Like you're in a pretty good spot. So, like, if we can just like take one thing and be like, okay, let's put this in the bucket of things we just don't have to worry about as much. I think that that can be a good strategy. Just kind of check it off the list, and then maybe you just have more energy to worry about other things. But but we all got to do what we can to feel a little bit better about the world.
There you go. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.